The lake had always been my refuge, a slice of paradise nestled in the heart of rural Texas. From my cabin porch, I could watch the sun shimmer off the water, casting golden ripples in the breeze. It wasn't just a lake to me, it was a legacy, passed down through generations of my family. Every fish caught, every lazy boat ride, and every sunset watched from the dock carried with it a deep sense of belonging. That's why, when the HOA president, Harold Hal Thornton, came striding up my driveway one crisp morning, clipboard in hand, I knew it wasn't going to be a pleasant visit. "You must be Mr. Jensen," Hal began, his tone dripping with that fake cordiality HOA type seemed to perfect. "Lovely place you've got here." "Thanks," I said, leaning casually against the porch railing. "What can I do for you?" "Well," Hal said, straightening his blazer as if preparing for a debate, "I'm here about that boat of yours parked down by the dock. It's not in compliance with HOA regulations." I raised an eyebrow. "HOA regulations? Hal, you do know this property isn't part of the HOA, right?" Hal chuckled condescendingly, flipping through his papers. "Actually, the lake is considered a communal resource under the HOA's jurisdiction. And as such, we have strict rules about watercraft and dock usage. That boat needs to be moved within 72 hours, or we'll have to impose a fine." I stared at him for a moment, trying to decide whether to laugh or get angry. Instead, I took a deep breath and kept my voice steady. "Hal, I think you've made a mistake. I own the lake, every inch of it as documented in my property deed. The HOA doesn't have any jurisdiction here." Hal's smug expression faltered for a split second before he regained his composure. "Be that as it may, we've received complaints from several residents. The boat is an eyesore and it's obstructing access for our fishing club members." "Fishing club?" My curiosity piqued. "What fishing club?" "The HOA Fishing Club," Hal replied, his tone now slightly defensive. "We've been hosting events on the lake for years. It's a valued community tradition." I folded my arms. "A tradition that no one bothered to ask my permission for?" Hal waved a dismissive hand. "There's no need to complicate things. Just move the boat and we'll all be fine." "No," I said firmly, my patience wearing thin. "The boat stays. And if your fishing club has been using my lake without permission, we need to have a much bigger conversation." Hal's face darkened. "I strongly suggest you reconsider. The HOA has legal standing to enforce compliance." I smirked. "Good luck with that." With that, Hal turned on his heel and marched back to his car, muttering under his breath. As his tires crunched down my gravel driveway, I felt a knot of anger tighten in my chest. Later that evening, as I walked down to the dock to check on my boat, I noticed something odd. Across the lake, I could see a group of people gathered near the far shore, setting up what looked like fishing gear and coolers. That's when it hit me, Hal hadn't been bluffing about the fishing club. My lake wasn't just my refuge, it had become a moneymaker for the HOA right under my nose. I knelt down by the water, the cool breeze brushing against my face. "They have no idea who they're messing with," I muttered, the spark of a plan already forming in my mind. The chapter closes with the protagonist standing on their dock, the serene lake reflecting the determination in their eyes, ready to reclaim what was theirs. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee, surrounded by stacks of documents. My family's property deed lay open in front of me, and I had been cross-referencing every word with the HOA bylaws I downloaded from their website. Sure enough, my ownership of the lake was crystal clear. The deed, filed decades ago, explicitly stated that the lake and its shoreline fell entirely within the boundaries of my land. The HOA's jurisdiction ended at the property line, which was about a quarter-mile away. But something still nagged at me. How had they managed to host a fishing club on my lake for years without me knowing? To get answers, I turned to the town records office. After a few hours of combing through public filings, I hit the jackpot: an old lease agreement between the HOA and the previous owner of a neighboring property. The agreement allowed the HOA to access the lake for community recreational purposes, but it had expired years before I purchased the land. I couldn't help but laugh. Not only were they trespassing, but their entire operation was based on a document that was no longer valid. My next stop was the bait shop at the edge of town, where local fishermen liked to gather. If anyone knew about this so-called fishing club, it would be the folks here. "Fishing club?" The shop owner, a burly man named Gus, said with a chuckle. "Yeah, they've been running that racket for years. Charge people a pretty penny too. Only HOA members and their guests get access." "How much are we talking?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "Couple $100 a season at least," Gus said. "Heard they even host tournaments." Big moneymaker for the HOA. I clenched my jaw. It wasn't just a casual group of neighbors casting a line on weekends, they were profiting off my property. Armed with this new information, I spent the rest of the day consulting a lawyer. Thankfully, my attorney, Sandra, was as fiery as they come. After reviewing the lease agreement and my deed, she confirmed what I already suspected. "They're trespassing, plain and simple," Sandra said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "You have every right to shut them down. If they try to fight it, they don't have a legal leg to stand on." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and determination. "Then let's make it official. I want to send them a formal notice." Sandra smirked. "With pleasure." By the time I got home that evening, I felt like I had the upper hand. But I wasn't done yet. If I was going to put an end to this fishing club nonsense, I wanted to make sure they couldn't weasel their way out. I spent the next few days preparing. I put up new no trespassing signs around the lake, installed a gate at the main access point, and even set up a few motion-activated cameras. I wasn't just reclaiming my property, I was fortifying it. The formal notice was sent to the HOA, giving them a 14-day deadline to cease all activities on the lake. Hal responded almost immediately, calling my cell phone in a panic. "You're making a big mistake," he blustered. "This is going to hurt the entire community." "No, Hal," I replied calmly. "This is going to hurt your community. Maybe next time, you'll think twice before taking advantage of someone's property." His sputtering response was music to my ears. That evening, I took my boat out for a quiet ride across the lake. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting fiery streaks of orange and red across the water. It was a stark contrast to the storm I was about to unleash on the HOA. As I floated there, I couldn't help but smile. They thought they could bully me into compliance. They thought they could profit off my lake without consequences. They were wrong. When the 14-day deadline came and went without any action from the HOA, it was time to move from warnings to enforcement. The first thing I did was revoke the HOA's access to the lake entirely. I installed a heavy-duty chain and padlock on the boat ramp gate, blocking the only paved access point to the water. Signs reading "Private Property, No Trespassing," were placed at every visible shoreline spot. Then I followed up with a notice to the HOA, detailing the legal consequences of violating my property rights. Predictably, the complaints started rolling in. Hal called me first, ranting about the inconvenience I was causing. "You're being unreasonable," he barked over the phone. "You can't just cut off the community like this." "I think you'll find I can," I replied coolly. "And I suggest you reread the notice my lawyer sent you. Trespassing is a serious offense, Hal." Hal wasn't the only one upset. Over the next week, HOA members started showing up at my property, pleading for access. It wasn't their fault the fishing club was run on false pretenses, but I couldn't let that slide. I referred them all back to the HOA board. Meanwhile, Sandra helped me prepare the second phase of my plan. She had discovered that the HOA's fishing club had failed to pay taxes on the revenue they had generated from tournaments and memberships. We filed a report with the State Revenue Department, adding to the mounting pressure on Hal and his cronies. The final piece of the puzzle came during the next HOA meeting, where I decided to make a public appearance. It wasn't my usual scene. I avoided these meetings like the plague, but this one was too important to miss. The meeting room was packed, a mix of frustrated HOA members, confused residents, and the usual board suspects. Hal sat at the front, looking frazzled but still trying to maintain control. When I walked in, all eyes turned to me. Hal cleared his throat. "Ah, Mr. Jensen. I assume you're here to discuss the lake situation." "I am," I said, stepping up to the front. "But first, I'd like to ask the board a question. How long have you been using my lake for the fishing club?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hal's face turned red. "As I've explained, the lake is a community asset." "No, it's not," I interrupted, holding up a folder of documents. "The lake has been private property for generations. The lease agreement that allowed your access expired years ago, and your continued use has been nothing short of trespassing." The room went silent. "And that's not all," I continued. "Your fishing club's revenue, generated from tournaments and memberships, hasn't been properly reported or taxed. I've already filed the necessary paperwork with the state. You'll be hearing from them soon." Hal stammered, but he had no rebuttal. The board members exchanged nervous glances, realizing the gravity of the situation. "To be clear," I said, addressing the room, "this isn't personal. I value community as much as anyone. But when that community takes advantage of me and my property, there are consequences. Effective immediately, the HOA is barred from using the lake. Any future violations will result in legal action. I turned and walked out, leaving the room buzzing with whispers and shocked expressions. That night, I celebrated on the dock, the calm waters reflecting the stars above. I knew the HOA would scramble to respond, but they had no leverage. The lake was mine, and for the first time in years, it truly felt like it. The fallout from my declaration at the HOA meeting was swift and dramatic. Over the next few weeks, the HOA board tried every tactic they could think of to regain access to the lake. Letters were sent, lawyers were called, and one particularly bold board member even tried sneaking onto the property late at night. The motion-activated cameras caught them red-handed. Sandra wasted no time filing a trespassing complaint, which shut down any further stunts. Faced with mounting legal troubles, the HOA began to crumble under its own weight. Hal, the self-assured president, became a scapegoat for the members' frustrations. By the end of the month, he had resigned in disgrace. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to the lake itself. For too long, it had been exploited without my permission, and I was determined to turn the situation into a positive for the community, on my terms. Using the funds I had saved by cutting out the HOA freeloaders, I hired a small team to revamp the lakefront. The boat ramp was widened, new picnic tables and benches were installed, and I even added a small floating dock for kayakers and paddleboarders. But the crown jewel of the transformation was the fishing area. With help from local anglers and conservation experts, I stocked the lake with a variety of fish species and built designated zones for fishing tournaments. Access to the lake became free for local residents, but I charged a modest fee to outsiders, with all proceeds going toward maintenance and stocking efforts. The grand reopening event, advertised as a community lake revival, drew a huge crowd. Families, anglers, and nature enthusiasts came together to celebrate the lake's new chapter. Seeing kids laugh as they reeled in their first catches and neighbors bonding over shared meals brought a sense of joy and unity I hadn't felt in years. As for the HOA's fishing club, they were evicted from the lake entirely. Without access to their prized venue, membership plummeted, and their tournaments became a thing of the past. Months later, I heard through the grapevine that Hal had moved out of the neighborhood altogether. Word was he tried to start fresh in another town, but his reputation followed him. A fitting end, I thought, for someone who had spent years exploiting others. On a sunny afternoon, I found myself sitting on the dock, my feet dangling just above the water. The lake was alive with activity, kids splashing in the shallows, boats gliding across the surface, and birds skimming the water for a quick snack. "Mind if I join you?" a voice asked. I turned to see Gus, the owner of the local bait shop, holding a couple of fishing rods. "Not at all," I said, scooting over to make room. He handed me a rod and we cast our lines out into the calm waters. For a while, we sat in comfortable silence, the only sounds coming from the gentle lapping of the lake and the occasional cheer from the shore. "You did a good thing here," Gus said finally. "Thanks," I replied, watching the sun dip lower on the horizon. "It feels good to have the lake back where it belongs, with the people who care about it." As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a deep sense of peace. The lake was more than a piece of property, it was a legacy, a sanctuary, and now a place that brought people together. The HOA had underestimated me, but they'd also underestimated the power of community. In the end, justice wasn't just served, it flourished. "You said